Good evening. Thank you for coming out for our exciting event tonight. I'm Allison Ormsby, Professor of Environmental Studies here at Eckerd College. We are so thrilled to welcome Dr. Vandana Shiva to Eckerd College. This is a result of over 2 years of planning and the collaboration of numerous people. I'd like to thank the many people in offices whose support made this event possible. First, Mary Meyer McAleese and Bill Felice from the International Studies and Global Affairs program, and the Colonel Christian L. and Edna M. March International Relations Lecture Series. Also, the Environmental Studies Department, the Center for Spiritual Life's Birchnell Lecture Series, and the Luce Initiative for Asia and the Environment. Finally, from our Eckerd College Organization of Students, ECOS, both President Brady O'Donnell and Greg Johnson, Vice President for Academic Affairs. I'd like to also announce that there's going to be a book signing in the back of the room. If you have a book of Dr. Shiva's that you would like signed, you can take it to the table in the back for her to sign after the question and answer period. Dr. Shiva is trained as a physicist and is best known for her environmental activism. She has published numerous books on topics including biopiracy, global food security, feminism, and justice issues. Forbes magazine has identified Dr. Shiva as one of the 7 most powerful women in the world. Yay. In 1991, she founded Navdanya, an organization and movement with the goal of protecting the diversity and integrity of living resources, especially native seeds, and to promote organic farming and fair trade. As Dr. Shiva says in her book, and the title of tonight's event, Making Peace with the Earth, wars against the earth become wars against people, and peace with the earth is linked to peace among people, based on mutual respect, dignity, and equality. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Shiva.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Allison, and the entire network of organizations, departments that have worked, and as you said, for 2 years. I only come to know later. And I had no idea what a beautiful campus I was coming to. For the students who are from this campus, you are blessed. You know, people go to places like this, and you live in an area where the gift of the water and the gift of the mangroves and the trees are all there for you every day as a teacher. Because that's something we forget. And it was our national poet Tagore who wrote in a very beautiful essay. It was actually his speech at the World Religions Conference in Chicago, I think in the 30s, where he said, the true lessons of democracy are learnt from the forest. Because in the forest there is no rule that says only the giant tree will survive. There's space for the tiniest of herbs, the tiniest of beings, and in the forest they're all equal. Not in size, but in their right to exist. And that's part of what has unleashed the wars both against people and against the planet. This idea of imposing a world of constructed sameness. So just a few centuries ago, a few men, a Newton, a Descartes, a Bacon, decided that the world was made of immutable particles and that these particles could never be destroyed. And the laws that were worked out for their movement were the only laws that mattered. And that the only qualities. I mean, Descartes went to the extent to say the only qualities of the world that are true primary qualities are what you can measure, the weight and dimension of things. And he called everything else the true knowledge that we get through the 5 vehicles of interacting with the world, our 5 senses. That true knowledge of knowing when a sound is a good sound and a bad sound, when a smell is a good smell or bad smell of a rotten fish, or the taste of fake food and real food. That all of that, don't trust yourselves. Don't trust your bodies, don't trust your experience. Trust us. And Bacon went so far as to say we are going to build a whole new race, and he called them supermen. And he called it the birth of masculine time. We are going to build a world of people who know more than the rest, because they will torture and rape nature to get her secrets. It's in his book, The Birth of Masculine Time. And this is where the war against the earth began, in the mines. It is based on the false assumption that nature is dead, when she's so alive. And we now know that all of the cultures that talked about the earth as a living mother weren't that far off the track. And so it took a NASA scientist, James Lovelock, and his work on the self-regulation of the planet as a whole that creates the temperature, that creates all the conditions for life to evolve on this planet. He found that there was no other word he could turn to but the name that the Greeks have for the earth goddess, so he called it the Gaia hypothesis, that the earth is living because she's self-organized. The other aspect of the projection onto nature was a mechanistic worldview, that everything's a machine. Everything can be broken into parts and fixed together, and there is no self-organization, there's no capacity, no intelligence. Of course, when nature's dead, you can always find another part. In your cars, you have, I know in India we still have these businesses that are auto parks, car parts, because we still have cars where you can replace the parts. Rather than one part goes, you throw away the whole thing. And the same with shoes. We still have in a few places cobblers who fix your shoes and don't have to throw it away when something goes. I know people who don't know how to fix a button on a shirt. And when one button goes, they throw the whole shirt. And it's cheaper to throw the shirt and buy a new one than to fix a button. So substitution and substitutability become the logic of this mechanistic worldview. And I remember so dramatically, in 1989, I think it would have been, I was celebrating the fact that the first movement I got engaged in, the Chipko movement, Chipko means to hug, and women of my region came out and said, we're going to hug the trees. You're not going to cut these trees because they're causing, the deforestation is causing floods and drought. We're walking further for water. And of course the government kept saying, oh my God, if we don't have revenues from timber, we're going to sink. Where will the economy go? And women used to be arrested for interfering in revenue collection. And then we had a flood so severe in 1978 that the government realized what they were saying was right, that the first function of the forest is conservation of soil and water, and they'd added pure air. Today, the forests of my region, because of 10 years of persistent action, are recognized to be conservation forests. Logging above 1,000 meters isn't allowed. But the women who'd never been to school knew this. They didn't need a PhD in ecological science. But that year, Chipko got, I think 89, it got the alternative Nobel Prize, which I got later in 93. The Nobel Prize for economics went to a man called Robert Solow, who said we never have to worry about the ecological crisis. Because for every resource we run out, we'll find a substitute. And the substitution thesis works even when they're not able to find substitutes. So this assumption that you can keep trashing the earth and keep unleashing war against her, because we will always come out winners, this road to conquest can never stop. But it is already so challenged. Look at all the planetary boundaries that have been broken, all the ecological limits that have been violated. The idea of limitless growth on a planet with limits, and the planet with limits is such a beautiful idea that if you let the rivers flow, they're going to give you water forever. You dam them up, you divert them, you deplete them, you pollute them, you won't have water. If you return organic matter to the soil on the law of return of the nutrient cycle, which should be the fundamental law within which we live and work, the nutrient cycle, we have food forever. But the idea that the ecological fertility of the soil, the billions of soil organisms, can be substituted with ingredients from factories that were originally designed to produce chemicals for the war, has led to exhaustion of soils. I've seen in the tropical climate that we are part of, soils depleted in 5 years, water mined in 10 years. So that which would have lasted forever if we worked within the limits ends up becoming a 5-year, 10-year economy. And because we live in that assumption that the resources are substitutable and ecosystems are substitutable, if we've trashed this one, we'll go to the next, and we'll go to the next, and we'll go to the next. It allows this war to carry on. I remember, it must have been the late 90s. I was invited in a desperation. I had a call saying, please come down and help us. The women have been arrested because they broke the shrimp ponds. Industrial shrimp farming. Now, we have shrimp in the ocean, abundant shrimp in the ocean. They reproduce, they're harvested, they're one among many species. It used to be the case that shrimp was considered a luxury. Off and on, you'd have a special meal with shrimp. And some brilliant people said, no, we should make it an easy, accessible commodity. And World Bank was available to give loans. Now, how do you grow fish on the land? You first harvest the pregnant shrimp in the sea. And like all of us who love our liberty and freedom, the shrimp love their liberty and freedom too. So they don't spawn in captivity. They don't lay their eggs. You know what the technique is? To force them to lay their eggs in these factory farms, literally. No, they pull the eye out. So in the shock, the shrimp lays these eggs, and that's how they stock the ponds. They can't create shrimp. They take the same shrimp that would have given all those eggs in freedom, and most of the spawning is in mangroves. When you create shrimp farms, you cut the mangroves. And when I went down and studied this, and I did the calculations, for every dollar traded, $10 of local economy destroyed, for every job created in these shrimp farms, and there are only 2 jobs. You paddle stuff to aerate the ponds, and you throw antibiotics and these intensive feed. That's all you do. For every job created in shrimp farming, 10 livelihoods are destroyed in fisheries and in agriculture, because the salt water that gets brought to the pond seeps out and makes all the water salty. And just like the women of Chipko said we're having to walk too far for water, the women of the coastal area said there's no drinking water left, we're having to walk 10 miles. And in frustration, they just broke the ponds. And when they were arrested, I was called down and I did the study, and that became the basis of Supreme Court case. And, the industrial shrimp farming was stopped. Industry has always tried to change the laws. And we were doing a public hearing, and we'd call people not just from around India, but around the world who were working on industrial shrimp farming. And I remember this old person said, they're destroying the mangroves. The next time we have a disaster, we're going to be wiped out. Sure enough, in 2004, we had the Bay of Bengal tsunami. And I rushed down for rehabilitation work. The villages that had fought and refused to let the ponds come up had the dunes and the mangroves, and they were absolutely protected. Wherever there were shrimp farms, the villages were devastated. First thing we did was take down seeds that could tolerate the salt, because the government had said no possibility to do agriculture for 5 years till the salt gets washed off. And we said, no, we've got salt-tolerant seeds. And we took 2 truckloads because we'd saved them in Orissa. The second thing was I went to the women and said, what are your real needs? And I remember this woman, and she was speaking Tamil. It was Tamil Nadu. We have 64 languages. I speak my mother tongue, Hindi, but there's always translators. And so she used a phrase, and I asked the person with me, I said, what is she saying? And she was describing the mangroves. She said, we want saplings of trees that caress the angry waves. That's the name of mangroves in the Tamil language. So I was sad to see some of the mangroves chopped, and I hope that'll be the end of a mistake, and this beautiful campus will have the mangroves as its earth community, and a very important part of the earth community. A very significant war against the planet comes from what I have described as the monoculture of the mind. Because in a world of diversity, each time you impose a monoculture, you have to do it through violence. Just as much as in societies which are diverse, every time you impose uniformity, you have to engage in violence. And the person who took this to the ultimate extreme was Hitler, with his idea of imposing a uniformity of a superior species, a superior race. The sad thing is he distorted our culture and our symbols. He called it the Aryan race, and worse, he took the symbol of Om, which is clockwise, and turned it into the swastika as anti-clockwise. And most people who don't know the difference imagine that Indians follow Hitler, rather than Hitler having distorted this most amazing symbol, which is no particular religion symbol. It's basically the original cosmic sound. And all the basic sound, the basic geometry. The reason I wear a bindi is sometime I read a beautiful book on the Sri Chakra, the chakra for the female energy, and it described how the bindu, the moving dot, makes everything, a line, a circle, a triangle, and so all of the cosmos can be represented by this. So, babies just love my bindi, and their eyes will turn like this. And sometimes when they can speak, they will look, and I say, "You're looking at this? Why do you wear it?" I said, "It's the universe." And they all burst into a grin. Kids understand. But adults who've been brainwashed can't figure it out. There's something called the seed. This is a seed symbol. Om is a seed sound. The seed contains everything. including the seeds of our crops, that they are the beginning of the food chain. And this idea of monocultures, when it was imposed into agriculture, it was really imposed to make agriculture chemical friendly. Because just like Gaia as a whole, Gaia as a planet is self-organizing. Every species is self-organizing. And as a self-organizing species, there's evolution. And evolution contributes to diversity. And when the evolution of nature and the evolution of human mind come together, that diversity increases so much. So 200,000 rice varieties our peasants evolved. 200,000 out of one grass called the Oryza sativa. Out of one wild plant called the teosinte, the Mexicans gave us all the varieties of corn. That is the highest level of intelligence at work. But intelligence as the self-organizing of life, and intelligence as the self-organizing capacity of human beings, understanding the laws of the earth and her species, and working as co-creators, not as conquerors. And it's the only way we can be at peace with the earth, when we work in consonance with the laws of the earth and her beings, not as conquerors and masters and owners. Now, 1984 is the year, because of a series of disasters in India, I was forced to start looking at agriculture. It's the year we had a disaster of Bhopal, the leak from a pesticide plant owned by Union Carbide, thousands dead, hundreds of thousands still crippled. And same year we had the rise of extremism in Punjab. Punjab is the land of the 5 rivers, prosperous, fertile, hard-working farmers. This is where chemical agriculture was first introduced in the third world in the name of the Green Revolution, which was not green, not revolutionary. And the Green Revolution was given a Nobel Peace Prize. In 1984, Punjab was a land of bloodshed. And as a scientist, my mind cannot live with unexplained phenomena. Here's war, here's a peace prize, what happened? There's something that doesn't hang together. So I decided to look. I was doing work for the United Nations University. And I said to them, something's going on here. I want to understand it. And I did the work. I wrote the book called The Green Revolution, The Violence of the Green Revolution. And I realized then that the reason industrial agriculture is so violent is it comes from war. These are not side effects. These are not unintended consequences. They are the original intention. And of course, it's a war both in terms of the mindset as well as in terms of the tools that are shaped. In terms of the mindset, it's an agriculture where you have to define every insect as a pest and exterminate them with pesticides. And the brilliance is finding the next pesticide, not in finding how insects don't become pests. Every plant is a potential weed. Exterminate with weedicides. So the logic of extermination that Hitler practiced in the concentration camps has moved into our farming systems and the paradigms of agriculture. And it's not an accident, because the chemicals that get used as agri-chemicals have their roots in war. The chemical fertilizers, the nitrogen fertilizers, are made in the same factories that used to make explosives. The Haber-Bosch process. Haber was on the one hand working out the nitrogen fixing through this very high temperature use of fossil fuels, but he was also working on the explosives. He was also working on the poison gases. And those were the precursors of the pesticides. So it's not an accident. I say Bhopal was not an accident because these chemicals were first designed to kill people. After the wars, they were made to look like they're designed to kill pests, but they'll still kill people. And the numbers we lose every year because of pesticide poisoning, the numbers we lose every year because of cancers, the numbers of species that are dying. The entire environment movement of this country began with Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. It's about pesticides. People attacked her. And yet she gave the entire environmental protection framework to this country. So literally, our agriculture has been turned into a war. And it's all being justified in the name of feeding the world. And there are many reasons why that claim of feeding the world is so false. First, it's false because actually, as I realized at the time of the Green Revolution and now with our studies later, it is not producing more food. It's producing more commodities, and commodities are not food. Commodities get traded, food nourishes our bodies. 90% of the GMO corn and soya is going for biofuel and animal feed. And they still want to have more GMO corn and soya in the name of feeding the world? 30% of the food that people eat comes from industrial farms, and we are made to believe that these large agribusiness-run farms are the source of food for the world. Only 30% is what they provide. 70% is still provided by small farms, against which for 50 years we've had a war. And yet, today, 70% comes from them. This is United Nations data. So the system that's giving us 30% of our food is destroying 75% of the planet. In terms of biodiversity, the United Nations had a whole conference in '95 on plant genetic resources and identified industrial monocultures as the single biggest reason for displacement of diversity and destruction of species. Right now we are watching how bees are going between the combination of neonicotinoids, which is required by law to coat the seeds, only because you've messed the soil up so badly that you've killed all the beneficial organisms and now they're only pathogens. So rather than heal the soil through organic farming and bringing back the life to the soil so beneficial organisms can grow again, you're now forcing poisons on every seed. And that is then part of the reason for bee deaths, but the Bt toxin crops. There was a very important study done in Cornell in the early days where they fed the larvae of the monarch butterfly pollen from Bt corn and pollen from non-Bt corn. The non-Bt corn larvae survived very well. All of the larvae that were fed Bt corn died. And there's another way, from the data I'm reading, only 10% of the population of the monarch butterfly is surviving right now. Roundup ready crops are killing the milkweed on which the larvae of the monarch feed, which is why the NRDC, Natural Resource Defense Council, has just filed a case on threatened species to stop the use of glyphosate. I say that GMOs are really putting an industrial agriculture that was already non-sustainable on steroids. And not only is it leading to faster rates of biodiversity erosion, instead of the 8,500 plant species we used to eat, we are trading in 4 commodities, corn, soya, canola, cotton, which are genetically modified. We've managed to destroy the water because of this industrial agriculture model. We've managed to desertify and kill the soil fertility of soils. And as I've written in my book, Soil Not Oil, 40% of all greenhouse gases that are destroying the climate balance are coming from an industrial globalized model of farming. That includes the carbon dioxide coming from dependence on fossil fuels. It's a system that is fossil fuel intensive, whether it be in food mile and transport, or it be in the production of chemical fertilizers, or it be in the replacement of people with what has been called energy slaves. Behind every American are 300 energy slaves. They're not seen when a big Caterpillar tractor or harvester drives past, but they're putting pressure on the planet and on the atmosphere. Then you have nitrogen oxide from nitrogen fertilizers, which is 300 times more destabilizing for the climate. And methane from factory farms, as well as the food waste, because that same uniformity that is being imposed on agriculture for the chemicals is then leading to waste, because if a fruit decides to take its own shape, it has to be exterminated. I was on a tour in New Zealand a month ago, and they have so much fruit, and I'm sure if I went through Florida it would be the same. But under the apple trees and the peach trees were all of these fruits. And I said, why is there so much fruit lying waste? And they said, it's unfit. I said, unfit for whom? Unfit for uniformity. They literally go with vernier calipers to measure the size of the fruit. And can you imagine if that logic was applied on us? If one of our children was short, you said, too short, out. One was tall, too tall, out. One thin, out. One fat, out. Nobody would survive. It's that logic of extermination based on uniformity. Now, if only 30% has destroyed 75% of our planet, if you were to only reach 45% of our food supply, in terms of the industrial food supply, we'd have a dead planet. That's not a very smart way to either feed ourselves or live on this planet. So why do I call GMOs as industrial agriculture on steroids? From 1992 to 2007, the use of Roundup jumped from 11,000 tons to 88,000 tons in this country alone. Between 1996 to 2011, 527 million pounds of additional glyphosate Roundup was sprayed. And this, when the entire argument for GMOs was it's a substitute to chemicals. We're going to put a Bt toxin into the plant so you won't have to spray a pesticide. Pesticide and herbicide use has just gone through the sky. There are only two applications, as I mentioned. One is Bt, where you take a toxin and put it into the plant, and the plant becomes its own pesticide factory. And the other is the herbicide tolerant, the Roundup Ready category of crops. Monsanto repeatedly said that Roundup and glyphosate is biodegradable, it's practically non-toxic, it's safer than table salt, it's environmentally benign, and the New York Attorney General had to sue them for false advertising. Now this was way back when so much of the evidence of harm wasn't there. And you cannot assess a genetically engineered crop that is designed to be tolerant to Roundup without the Roundup, because that's what it's designed for. Now, as the package itself goes, research in Europe has shown there's organ failure, there's tumor. I would recommend to all of you to read the work of Dr. Seralini and his team. He was a regulator of the French government. When he saw the applications made by Monsanto and how sloppy they were, He said, I'm going to go back to science and do the research to find out what's really going on. The only one who's done a 2-year study. It was published in the Journal of Food and Chemical Toxicology. 24 hours, it was all over the world. Then the pressure started from the Monsantos of the world. Retract, retract, retract. The journal said, sorry, it's peer-reviewed. Science is done through peer review. We can't retract it. They just changed the editor, put Goodman in place, who then writes a one-line and says, I retract this paper. Doesn't happen unless there's some really big fraud that's caught, usually which is caught before publication, because the scientists are assessing it. Read Dr. Seralini's paper. Dr. Eric Seralini, and since then the paper's been published in the Journal of Environmental Science, European Journal of Environmental Science, and all the background data is there, all of the background data. And one of the arguments that is used by Monsanto to say the reason glyphosate is totally safe for us is because it kills the plants through disrupting the metabolic pathway that's called the shikimate pathway. And we don't have it. An absolute lie. The human cells don't have it, but we are part of an ecosystem. All of the millions and billions of soil organisms in our gut are part of us. Those gut bacteria have that same pathway. And glyphosate is killing all the beneficial gut bacteria. Now, the peace with the earth translates into peace with ourselves. Because for every harm we do to the soil, we are doing harm to our bodies. There's an intimate connection between the health of the soil, the health of our gut, the health of the plants, the health of our guts, and now the health of our brains. And scientists who are looking are saying, we must do more research to find out these connections. Why is there a 99.9% correlation between the increase of the use of GMOs and glyphosate and the increase in autism? Why have the rates of autism in this country jumped from 1 in 10,000 a few decades ago to 1 in 68 about 5 years ago, 1 in 35? This is not a genetic basis. It is an environmental basis. And any decent society should be looking at what in the environment is causing this kind of epidemic in autism and neurological disorders. Some of the scientists are saying this is what we need to be looking at. Glyphosate chelates, it binds minerals. It locks them up like in a cage. One of the minerals that's vital to the functioning of our gut and functioning of the gut-producing enzymes that allow the neurotransmitters to work is manganese. Manganese being taken out of our body system through the buildup of glyphosate. And every time a scientist says, please do the research, they're hounded. So I have been doing work and research now for more than 40 years. I have dealt with the most powerful of lobbies in mining, in forestry, in fisheries, in dam building. I have not seen a lobby like the biotech lobby. And I say, well, I shouldn't really be surprised because they came out of the war. They came out of spraying Agent Orange on Vietnam and hiding the facts. Not just from the Vietnamese, from the veterans here. And they could keep declaring things safe when they weren't safe, knowing very well they weren't safe. But what shocks me is the fact that some of the biggest names in science and some of the biggest journals are being used. I couldn't believe this National Geographic. This is a war on science, and of course we know there are a bunch of climate skeptics financed by the fossil fuel industry who say climate change doesn't happen. And then it equates the climate skeptics with those of us who on the scientific basis are working on agroecology, showing that ecological agriculture is more productive, has more nutrition. Let me just run through the data. So this is US and UK data. Decline in calcium. This is comparison of organic versus conventional. Decline in calcium, 29%, in Britain, 19%. Magnesium, 21%, Britain, 35%. Potassium, 6%, in Britain, 14%. Phosphorus, 11 and 6. Iron, 32 and 22. It's a hugely efficient system to take nutrition out of our food and create nutritionally empty and toxic loaded commodities. That's not what food was supposed to be about. Food is supposed to be full of nutrition and without toxics. So I've been doing seed saving, ecological agriculture now for 30 years and more. And I'll just read out some data from typical biodiverse farms. I'll just give an example. We've studied more than 200. So in a system where we grow millets and some native pulses like gehet and bhat, I'm not going to spend time translating these into their English names, and anyway they don't have English names. But protein content between a chemical monoculture of paddy versus a diverse crop of organic, 338 versus 90. I'm not also going to spend time giving you micrograms and milligrams because it'll take forever. Carotene, beta carotene, important for the eyes, 2,540 versus 24. Now, instead of just growing the diversity that produces vitamin A rich food, what is the GMO lobby offering? A golden rice. A golden rice which will have 35 units of micrograms in a gram of food. It would, at best, provide a few percent of your daily requirement. If you had to meet your daily requirements, you'd have to eat about between 1 to 3 kilos of rice. Things like amaranth or the drumstick, which we eat regularly in India, which are killed when you spray with weedicides and herbicides. The vitamin A contribution is 14,000 and 19,000, but that's not all that they give. They also give you iron. Amaranth gives you 11 milligrams, drumstick 28. In terms of the vitamin A, the golden rice is at least 1,000% less efficient in providing vitamin A. And they've now decided they're going to genetically engineer the banana with iron. 5,000% less efficient than the alternatives we have, like the turmeric we eat. It's amazing. Here are inefficient systems, an industrial system, 10 units of input, 1 unit of output. Having no nutrition. Then you do genetic engineering, and even there the nutrition provision is pathetic. And you're not looking at the health impact. And then you mobilize all of the media, all of the scientific system to say safety is proven. Now, I read through this National Geographic article. It's got 3 lines. 3 lines on GMOs. The cover says genetically modified food, as if there'd be a whole section. And there's only, the line is, there's no reason to believe that altering genes precisely in a lab is more dangerous than altering them wholesale through traditional breeding. Every word there is a manipulation of science. There's nothing precise about genetic engineering. You shoot with a gene gun or you infect with a plant cancer, and you don't know if the introduced gene will be absorbed by the cells, which is why you add antibiotic resistance markers, which is an evidence of the impreciseness of the technology. And then you add viral promoters, which is a second evidence that this technology doesn't work without a lot of force. The viral promoters pump up the expression. So every GM food has the toxic gene, the vector, the antibiotic resistance marker, and a viral promoter. And do they test for all that? No. They don't. And in traditional breeding, you don't alter genes. You work with the intelligence of the plant and your intelligence to do the most amazing selections and crosses, which is how we've constantly increased food production while adapting our species to changing climates. The real intelligence lies in working with evolution. The interesting thing is, because they're doing so much spin, they've gone back to that monkey trial to make it look like the debate on how our food should be grown is about a monkey trial. And they're making it look like those who look at evolution today are anti-evolution. You have to be anti-evolution to assume that you can create an antibiotic, you can create a Roundup-ready crop, which will put all the stresses on the weeds, and it won't become a superweeds. That is denial of evolution. It's denial of evolution to imagine pests won't become super pests. That's evolution. And that's what we are talking about when we talk of safety. Now, I happen to have been at the Earth Summit 1992, where we shaped the Convention on Biological Diversity. I was appointed by the United Nations to be a member of the expert group, the only non-governmental member, to shape the framework for the treaty on biosafety. There's a UN Cartagena Protocol in international law on biosafety. 169 countries aren't stupid to have signed it, to require the study of impact of GMOs on safety. And what is safety defined as? Safety defined as impact on the environment, impact on public health, and impact on socioeconomic conditions. Impact on the environment we are seeing, including contamination. That's an impact on the environment. Public health, the research is being done in other parts of the world, no research in this country, because President Bush came back and said, let's pretend that a genetically modified organism is like a non-genetically modified parent organism, and he got his vice president, who couldn't spell potato, to spell substantial equivalence. And this country, since 92, and we're in 2015, has been denied the research that was needed. Now that people are waking up and saying, at least let us have labeling. No, you can't have labeling. And you have Nina Fedorov, who I know because she wanted to meet me to try and not allow us to have a moratorium on BT eggplant. The snowstorm of Washington held her back, so she could not put pressure on our government, and we have a moratorium. Peter Raven, Miss Our Botanical Garden, wife used to head sustainability division of Monsanto, thick like that. Two of them have written a piece just now saying there's a scientific consensus on the safety of foods derived from GM, like there is about climate. GM foods are safe, climate change is real. There's no consensus. We've just published a paper in the European Environmental Science Journal that there's no consensus. We've done an analysis of how many papers are actually pointing to the indicators of harm. And here they are, absolutely denying the fact that there is a safety issue and there's a science of safety. And those who give us the GMOs aren't the best judges for that science of safety. Not only because shooting a gene with a gene gun and assessing the impact on a pollinator are different skills and expertise, but also because there's something called conflict of interest. So we are at this very, very crucial point where we've got two clear systems of science, of our relationship with the earth, our relationship with food. One system makes peace with the earth, and in the process gives us better health, more nutrition, gives our farmers more well-being. We've just done a new study and the foreword of this is written by our agriculture minister. I'd love to see the day your USDA chief writes a foreword to an agroecology book. We've assessed that chemical agriculture in India is having a negative externality of social impact of farmers getting into debt for the chemicals in the seeds, 291,000 farmers' suicides, not my data, Government of India data, all because of this industrial model of farming. You count that and you count all the chemical impacts on bees, birds, pesticide poisonings, soil degradation, water contamination. It's $1.2 trillion. Our GDP is 1.1. So we have a footprint that's bigger than the so-called economy. And I'm sure if you were to do a study of the externalities of industrial agriculture of this country, combining all the destruction of the soil and the water and the biodiversity and the bees and the pollinators, all of the damage to the health of the people, including a closure of the future of the children. The predictions of the Center for Disease Control are 1 in 2 children will be autistic on the current trends of the graph. How can a society have reached a stage where it says to half of its future generations, we don't care about you. We care about Monsanto's bottom line. Something has gone wrong, and you all need to get engaged in correcting it, and there's only one way to do it. Personally make peace with the earth, make sure your communities make peace with the earth, make sure your government makes peace with the earth, make sure your corporations make peace with the earth. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
That was so great. We have a little bit of time for question and answer, and we have a few mics that are floating around the room. So if you'd like to ask a question, you can raise your hand. We're going to start with student questions first, to give students a chance to ask a question. Let's see. I've got a few over here. So if you could just stand up and ask your question clearly.
Is that on? Okay, cool. As a physicist and in doing your work with environmental phenomena of all kinds, floods and also the sea problems, isn't it universally accepted that correlation is not equal to causation? You spoke of autism a few times, that the trends are one-to-one. There are also many other trends that increase together and decrease together. Do you also think it's respectful to those with autism and other mental handicaps to imply what you're saying about genetically modified foods causing autism when your statements are, from what I've heard, based on mostly correlation and not causation?
Okay, 2 issues on that. What I said, I didn't say GMOs are causing this. I'm saying the spread of glyphosate plus GMOs is raising concern which needs to be studied. You did not hear the call for further research. And what I am disappointed with is the closure of research in these areas. No public resources of any kind, including in universities, first. Second, the issue of causation. I have a new book that was released on International Women's Day. It's Seed Sovereignty and Food Security in Women's Hands. And it has a paper, precisely because they've been going on like a parrot. Correlation is not causation. Correlation is not causation. The scientist has actually done what are the symptoms in autism, what are the processes linked to glyphosate and Roundup, which then explain some of those symptoms. And she too has said we need to look further. Okay? So anyone who becomes defensive with the call of more research, I find that very, very problematic. But the most important thing is this. I did my PhD in the foundations of quantum theory. Quantum theory tells you they're nothing like particles. Yeah? If you have a particle, then the impact of this on this particle is bang. Yeah? I know the cause is direct contact through action. In quantum theory, all you have is potential. So what you study is the context. And that measurement is the context. A particular measurement allows the expression of waves, another measurement allows the expression of particles. So the context decides the contribution of the qualities and the potential. Issues are getting so complex now, and so they always were in the world. But we developed a highly simplistic way of looking at the world as fragmented, divided, and linear causation, A to B. What we need to start looking at is contextual causation, where the context contributes to a tendency. And then society has a duty to make sure those tendencies don't grow. And I want to just add two little things. When I did my book on the Green Revolution and understanding the rise of violence, that's when I first started to say, in systems, you look at where are systems moving. Systems are about interconnected parts, not fragmented parts. We're just releasing a new manifesto, which will be out at the time of the Expo in Italy, which is dedicated to food. And of course, the big news these days is Boko Haram in Nigeria and ISIS in Syria. These entities didn't exist before 2009. In both places, you can look at land use, non-sustainable agriculture, and climate change, adding a convergence of forces to create such high levels of displacement. 1 million people displaced in Syria the year the violence began. I won't go into the details. Any responsible government should say, if you're making so much instability, shouldn't we stop the roots of the instability? Instead, everyone says, oh, let's sell more arms and have more armies and create more wars. When I say peace with the earth, I'm talking about these multi-layered understanding of complex systems. And complex systems are not complicated systems. I carried the silly thing with me from my room. I was trying to make a tea. It's very complicated, yeah, for milk. You have to tear this thing out. A lot of technology went into turning fossil fuel into the plastic. And then I'm supposed to put this into my tea. I couldn't bring it myself to bear it. It says Café Valet, non-dairy creamer. Ingredients are corn syrup, solids, partially hydrogenated soybean oil, and then 10 chemicals. It's very complicated. It's not complex. Complex is self-organizing capacity of ecosystems and social systems to constantly adapt and have resilience and evolve. That's what we are losing.
Hi, there we go. First of all, I'd like to thank you for coming to our campus today, and I think I speak on part of the student body that we appreciate you having here. My question is, what are your thoughts on how to overcome a globalized mindset to a more bioregionalist view?
Well, I think, given that food is where our deep relationship with the web of life is experienced, and the food is the web of life, because everything is food, and the whole circulation of nutrition and energy is through food. It's by creating ecological and local food systems that we make bioregionalism real. The argument used against local and ecological is it doesn't produce more food. I ran through a lot of data to show it's more productive. There's an International Assessment of Agricultural Science and Technology report that was done. It's the IPCC of agriculture. 400 scientists worked 6 years, and they've shown only ecological agriculture can double food production. Neither the Green Revolution nor genetic engineering can. The UNEP, UNCTAD, which is the trade body, FAO, have all come out with the recognition that only ecological agriculture can increase food production, and that's what our scientific evidence is on the basis of 30 years of actually practicing ecological farming. And the reason it needs to be local is because with climate change you need to both reduce your emissions and reduce your food miles, but you also want to reduce your risks of disruption. I mean, look at the storms you're having. One snowstorm, if you're living with your, the Walmart model of supply just in time, that's the end of your food supply. So the beauty of bioregional food economies is they're good for building community, they're good for building soil, they're good for building biodiversity, they're good for rejuvenating water, and most importantly, this is the single most effective way of dealing with climate change. You can literally take all the excess emissions and turn it into soil fertility.
We've got someone over here.
What do you think is your greatest legacy thus far?
The greatest what?
Legacy.
Whose?
Yours.
Mine. No, I live on the legacy of the earth and those who went before me.
Sorry, I'm just curious. I read the paper on the monarch butterflies, and from my understanding of it, I was just wondering what your take on this was, that the amount of Bt pollen, like corn pollen, that they put on the milkweed plants was unspecified, so it wasn't a peer-reviewed article and just kind of published in Nature as like a hot tip for scientists. But then there was like research done about it afterwards that said that like the Bt corn pollen wasn't toxic to butterflies. So I'm just curious on what your stance on that is.
So I mentioned the two strands, the Bt crops through the pollen and the Roundup ready crops through the milkweed. Okay? Now, every good study has been hounded by what I would call the biotech mafia. Right? They're very well organized. They turn up everywhere. Very often the people who make judgments on top scientists are people with BA in history or journalism, and BAs are wonderful when BAs do the work they were meant to do, yeah? But not when they pretend to be smarter than a Dr. Seralini, Dr. Arpat Putsai, or the scientist at Cornell, and the scientist at in Berkeley who did the work on atrazine and the change in the sex of the frog, how he was half hounded by Syngenta. And given that so many of you work on marine biology, all of that work on the runoff of these chemicals and what it's doing to water bodies is so important. The most important point is it's not the only study. I've done studies on the soil in the Bt cotton areas. In the first 4 years of planting, 22% beneficial organisms were gone because of the toxin. Because the toxin is being released in every cell of the plant all the time. Not just the pollen, in the leaves. And I've seen the women burn the leaves at the peak of summer. I said, why are you burning the leaves? The company told us to. Now I realize why the company tells them to. Because it's going to build up the toxin if they let the leaves lie there. I have a PhD student doing work on pollinators right now. She found 6 times more pollinators on our farm than in the forest next door. I sent her to the Bt cotton areas. She said, I could not find a single pollinator on a Bt cotton plant. Not one. So because in this country, very few studies have been allowed, and the few that were done have been hounded. We don't have enough studies, and then the research money that should be financing this is not coming, which is why I say what we are entering around the food issue. Who would imagine that the next experience of a totalitarianism would be through our food systems, including control over knowledge, control of ownership over seeds, control over media, control over research financing and our tax money. We are talking about a system of control humanity has never, ever experienced.
Let's take a couple more questions, and then Dr. Shiva will be in the back for the book signing.
Okay. Just kidding.
So nice to be here. And all of us, so many people. They say you are what you eat.
Mm-hmm.
Then what must be the reason that only 10%, that's my observation, 10% of US citizenry is aware of it, and they are very hesitant, and some of them are resisting the movement of natural food and organic food. What must be the reason? Why only 10% people are aware?
Well, there are two very clear reasons. One, all the tax money is going to subsidize bad food and make it cheap and make it look affordable. The rich country subsidy for chemical food, agribusiness food is $400 billion. That's $1 billion a day. And I was at a meeting when Prince Charles had come, and I'd been invited to George Washington University, and Vilsack, who is your USDA head, he was asked the question. This was soon after 2008, when a lot of people went into poverty. And this young woman said, are you going to increase food stamps? And are you going to reduce subsidies? And he said, I'm not going to touch subsidies, and most people who are lining up for food stamps are lying about their poverty. And we'll cut on food stamps, but not on subsidies. The second very big reason is what I said just now, the control of the media. Monsanto has spent $400 million just in the last 2 or 3 years on advertising, false advertising. Now, how many people go read the research papers of the Eric Seralini? How many people actually go to visit an organic farmer? Most of the time, their education comes from advertisement. And the advertisement has gone so big, and it's advertisement who defeated the labeling rights of the people of California, Washington, Oregon, and Colorado. And now that Vermont managed, through legislative means, to get a labeling law passed, they're being sued on grounds of free speech. You know, I find this the strangest thing that has happened in this country since you're Citizen United, that corporations are persons and their ability to steal our democracy and freedom is their free speech. They're not persons, they're legal constructs, and society gives them permission to operate within certain limits. And they definitely, because they're not persons, they don't have speech. Forget free speech.
Dr. Shiva, following up on that comment, and I'm a BA in history and political science, but I'm interested in this because I worked for one of the major food companies. I'm an attorney, and so I saw some of what you're talking about from the inside, and so that's why I'm against genetically modified foods. But I think one of the problems, and I'd like you to comment on this, is also the fact that we only have 2 political parties. The last election, I voted for Dr. Jill Stein of the Green Party, who's a public health physician who's concerned about public health, and the problem is these other parties can't get, the 2 parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, block third parties, and I think that's a problem we have, unique to all the other democracies that have multi-party systems. So if you could comment on that, that'd be great.
Well, I think with the kind of corporate influence that grew after so-called globalization, which wasn't a unity of the world becoming one grand village, it was really about corporations taking control through so-called free trade, which was rules written by them for themselves. Cargill wrote the rules of the Agreement on Agriculture of the WTO. Monsanto wrote the rules on the life form patenting, Article 27(3)(b) of the Intellectual Property Rights Agreement of WTO. The Nestle's and the Pepsi's and the Coca-Colas of the world wrote the sanitary and phytosanitary agreement rules on food safety. After their taking over so much power, they've actually genetically modified representative democracy. From being of the people, by the people, for the people, into being of the corporations, by the corporations, for the corporations. And that's why we have a double task. One is to get our representative electoral democracy process out of the Koch brothers' hands and the Monsanto hands. But we also have to create the real democracy. I call it earth democracy. I call it earth democracy because I don't think we will reclaim our humanity and our human rights without defending fiercely, with the deepest of love, the rights of the earth, because ultimately our rights depend on the earth. We will not be able to take on corporate personhood if we continue to live in a world of anthropocentric biases. It's only when we say this tree has standing, this fish has standing, the water has standing, that butterfly has standing, we will realize that we, as one of the 300 million species, also have rights. And that gives us the kind of responsibility as well as power to act in ways that marginalizes the system that's marginalizing life on earth and our own freedoms today. Earth democracy is democracy in everyday life. It's how we make decisions about the water we drink, how we make decisions and shape the food systems which nourish us. And this earth democracy is not about a consumer indifference democracy, that you go to the supermarket and buy. It is an active earth citizenship where you become engaged in the world you want to see. You want to see more biodiversity, you become seed savers. You want to see more organic farming, you become either an organic grower yourself or join hands with a farmer who's struggling somehow to survive. And that's the way to move it.
We're going to have one last question from the student over there, and then I invite you to line up in the back by the table for the book signing. I realize a lot of you are very interested, but we just don't have time for all the questions, so one last question.
Hi, is this working? Yeah. Okay. So I definitely agree that moving towards a more localized and regional food system is a way that we can solve a lot of our... It's working, yes, okay. So I agree that moving towards a more localized and regional food system is definitely a way that we can help solve a lot of the issues that we're facing within the food system. But what happens in areas that their land is essentially disappearing due to drought and flooding because of climate change, and maybe a genetically engineered crop that becomes drought resistant is their only option? Is that the only option, or do you have suggestions for ways to work around that if we are so anti-GMO? Like, what happens in those areas where they're not as privileged as the U.S. that has so much arable land?
Well, the first thing is, it's not a question of not the only option. It is not an option. Why is it not an option? Because climate resilience is a complex trait. It doesn't get engineered. Why are we stuck with two traits, HT and BT? BT crops, herbicide-tolerant crops. Because these are single gene transfers, along with the baggage of antibiotic resistance viral promoters, where one toxic trait gets expressed in that one gene. In climate resilience, dealing with drought, multiple genes come into play. So by and large, when corporations talk about genetic engineering, climate resilience, they've just stolen the climate resilient crops from countries like India. 1,500 patents on climate resilient crops. I told you about the salt tolerant seeds that we've saved and distributed with the tsunami. They didn't come from Monsanto. It came from farmers breeding and multiplication and free sharing. The drought tolerant corn that Monsanto's talked a lot about, it turns out, all of this shrinks the niche. So it does well in a drought year, but it does terribly badly in a normal year of rainfall. It fails because of again, the factor of complexity of genes acting. So first, genetic engineering is not the reason you get climate resilience, drought tolerance, salt tolerance, flood tolerance in crops. That's come from nature and traditional breeding. Second, because it works on such a narrow niche, and climate change is actually about climate chaos and climate uncertainty. It's not the case that one region will just keep getting drought. No, it'll get floods in one season and drought, and it'll get too much rain, and the summer it'll get too much heat. There is no way you can deal with that through narrowing the niche of adaptation. The only way to deal with those conditions is increase your niche of adaptation, and that is increase the biodiversity of crops you grow, increase the varieties. We offer a course now every year, A to Z of agroecology and organic food systems, from 1st of September to 30th of September. 1 week is dedicated to seed saving, seed conservation, participatory breeding, evolutionary breeding. Evolutionary breeding is the only way to deal with climate change. Have enough diversity for that diversity to keep adapting, and meantime increase the organic matter in your soil. And we do this, only our organic farmers have had crops in the bad rainfall years because the moisture in the soil gets conserved with organic farming. The reason we've got to get out of this one-dimensional thinking is the crises we face are multidimensional. And none of these magic bullet solutions address the complexity and multiplicity of crises. And for that we need evolution, and we need diversity.
Will the evolution catch up in time for the effects of climate change, do you believe?
I think that's a wrong question.
Okay.
It's a wrong question because this planet has been through so many periods of intense climatic change, the earlier ones not induced by human action in the clear way that this period is, but it's had even more traumatic shifts in temperature, in water endowments. And this planet is Gaia because of her evolutionary adaptive capacity. The only question to ask is, will human beings be around in that adaptive context?
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. And we can meet in the back for the book signing if you want to stick around.
Thank you very much.